Thank you, Sean. I just want you to have those. Yep. All right. Say it again. Oh yeah, do you have some updates that you could give us at the end? Okay, I'll call you. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon and welcome to the COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee. We have our agenda that has been sent out and posted online. And I wanted to tell you, we just have a slight change. We will still go ahead and start with a request from the Nashville Convention and Visitors Corp. But our second item on the agenda for the Office of Economic and Community Development, unfortunately, our director, Courtney Pogue, couldn't be with us today. So we have actually asked Hannah Davis from the mayor's office to come speak to a request for affordable housing. So something actually that the mayor mentioned in his State of Metro speech, and we're going to bring it next meeting, but we went ahead and decided with the time that we had allotted for ECD, we would go ahead and put affordable housing in. So a slight change to the agenda with that change, and as such, you should have at your desk the affordable housing request hard copy because that wasn't sent in the pre-meeting materials with the last minute change. So we will go ahead and get started. We have Butch Spearden here, President and CEO of the Nashville Convention and Visitors Corp. Butch, if you want, you can sit here. I'll get you a live mic, and that way you don't have to stand at the back and have everybody turn around. That should be, your mic should be on. You might have to tap. All right, let me try.
Test, test.
Right.
Nothing there. I can wing it.
Alex is, okay, I just turned on this one. Butch.
Test.
Oh, nope, you're good now.
I'm live. Well, thank y'all for giving me a few minutes. You might recall that through the governor's grant to the city, we applied for and were granted $500,000 to support diverse events in the community over the last year. So that money was well spent, in my opinion. It worked very well, and it saved some events from maybe not only not just happening, but possibly never happening again. So events like the Jefferson Street Jazz and Blues, the Fifth Jubilee Singers, 150th anniversary, the Stellar Awards, which is a televised black gospel event. I could go on, but the money was divided very well. We covered a lot of ground, and we believe we did a lot of good. So we're coming back with the idea that the new round of funding is spread out over 4 years. So we're asking for $750,000 this year to target some of those same events, to look after some new opportunities. We certainly have a couple examples are the black state legislators. I won't get the name right, but Representative Love and I have talked about that. And also next year we have National League of Cities in BC, LEO. So locally elected officials targeting the black audience. So we see a great opportunity to keep the momentum going. Our recovery is doing really well, and events are at the heart of that. So this is maybe more important than ever, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But we're accountable, we're transparent, we have spread the love as much as possible and given the city all the credit with that. Question?
Yes, I'm trying to.
I figure out how to.
There we go. Councilwoman Sepulveda.
Yes, thank you for being here today. Are there matching funds to the $750,000 or?
There haven't been. There wasn't in the first round, but all of the events have to be able to fund themselves. So it is additional money. It is not paying for anything in its entirety, but there hasn't been a direct match. We certainly could look at that, but that wasn't what we did in the first round. But everybody is spending more than what we are giving them. Yes.
Without spending too much time on it, just because I wasn't around the last go around, could you just give me a minute on what does this? I understand what organizations receive the funds, but how are they used? How are these funds used? What do they cover?
So Jump produces the Jefferson Street Jazz and Blues Festival. So that money went to the festival. So all the events are targeted toward bringing diverse visitation to Nashville. So it starts there. That's why we're involved. Fifth Jubilee Singers, their annual fundraiser at the Ryman Auditorium happens to be tomorrow night this year. We brought the Stellar Awards back last summer. They've been gone for a few years.
So they're basically just kind of operating expenses. You become a sponsor to these events, and then they use them for their
Correct.
to carry out their. And so, there's no real easy, direct way of like quantifying the impact of these funds. They support the events, and I totally appreciate that that's the case. But it wouldn't be like, okay, so we had of quantifying so many more visitors or the economic impact of that. There really is not an easy, direct way.
So it depends on the event. With the example of the couple of conventions, we can quantify that almost to the penny of what it's worth. A couple of the other events are designed to elevate them. So Jefferson Street Jazz and Blues, let's go after a bigger headliner. So we can draw more out-of-town visitors. Stellar Awards was a televised event, as was the Dove Awards with the local Gospel Music Association. So each one varies, but we have done surveys on site when we can, if it makes sense, and if, in the case of a convention, we have a formula that we can plug in and look at what those mean to us as well. So there's no two alike, but where we can, we do measure it.
Then I'll just say, I really like the idea of leveraging that with grant dollars from either state or corporations. I think that's a really easy way to, not necessarily for you to do, but to maybe incentivize.
We can ask them
this organization
to justify their request with what other sponsor dollars or other money they're putting in. Happy to do that.
That would really impact those organizations in a real positive way.
Mm-hmm.
We're able to push it down. Thank you.
Jose's question, some of these events on this list, and I know this is not an exhaustive list. I mean, some would, obviously, they've been around for quite a long time, and some would have more industry support and corporate sponsor support than others. When you talk about this sort of 4-year commitment, are there certain criteria of what's going to be prioritized in terms of whether it's a brand new event versus an existing event that we've regularly supported? And I don't know if there has been a situation where there's just an amount that's gone to some of these every year. But could you just kind of give a little color on just what the criteria will be for selection?
Sure. The number one criteria, if it's coming through us, is it an event that can either provide marketing for the city, if there's television, or if it is an event that will draw visitation to the city, overnight visitor spending. So those are the two primary things we look at. And then covering a pretty wide group of diverse events, from Gay Pride Weekend to Jefferson Street to Native American Powwow. And we've been helping the Native American Powwow probably for the better part of 20 years. But last year, and hopefully in the future, we've been able to help them elevate that event. And they're trying to build an interpretive center. So it's a good opportunity where the money goes to the event to draw visitation and awareness, but long-term, that money is going to be invested in an ongoing 365-day-a-year venue for us as well. I hope I answered your question.
Councilwoman Sepulveda?
Thank you. So looking at this list, I know that several times one of the big things that we always mention is that arts gets left behind and it's the first thing cut in many cases. And I do see that some of these events are cultural and can really help the local community and bring in visitors. And we want to make sure that we bring in money to our city to employ our people and to pay them well and all of that. And I do know that one of these events on here will be hosting for the first time. I believe it's the I think it's the National Black Caucus of Local Elected Officials Conference. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I do know that will probably be a one-time event that we will be hosting, and I do like the list. It's a good list. It's just, and I would be fine supporting it if the rest of my committee colleagues feel the need to. I keep coming back to priorities, and we have a draft guide, and I don't know where that would fit on our draft guide, and if there is an update on the hub, that would be helpful for the rest of the meeting, because I'm getting to the point where I don't feel too comfortable voting on some of these agenda items unless there are emergency needs, unless there is more community input. But 750,000 is one of the smaller item numbers that we have come before us, and it does bring a significant amount of cultural awareness, and making some of these marginalized groups, making them feel like we see and support them as a city. So I don't know, Mary Jo, if that's an agenda item. I didn't see it on the agenda, but it would be helpful for me for the rest of the meeting if there was an update.
Sure. So actually on the agenda is the hub survey. That is the hard copy that I passed out in front of you. And that actually has the guiding principles located just as a background information. And so if you look at 2C, small business and economic recovery, which includes small business recovery grant fund, economic, tourism and hospitality recovery funding focused on diverse events. So this was anticipated in that, in the guiding principles. I hate to go out of order. I don't know if having this in front of you is a kind of a nice little guideline and refresher as we go through the meeting, but then we do plan to discuss, does this cover what we want from an input on the community, input from the community and the different items. So for the time being, you actually have the guiding principles in front of you.
Yeah, and we don't have to vote on it right now. I guess we could table it till the end of the meeting and go through it.
In order. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And as you said, not an exhaustive list, and we want to leave some opportunity or an opportunity fund to take advantage of something new, but we also want to make sure our existing events survive this period we have been in.
Are there any other questions? I think from a resolution, this one's, from a drafting perspective, it would be fairly short. We are simply asking for the $750,000 for culturally diverse event sponsorships made by NCVC, for events to, including, not limited to the ones that you see listed. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Representative Love, let me get the right microphone. Okay.
Thank you, and mine is less of a question, more of a statement. I do want to commend the Visitors Corp for putting together this list as you recognize the need to attract other conventions and activities. 2023, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators will be coming to Nashville. A little known fact, it was started in Nashville in 1977.
I didn't know that.
Hasn't been back, I don't think, since then. And so for us to come back home is important. It's work my father was involved in when he was in the legislature around the time, Lois DeBerry and others. So, this is a good chance for us to be very intentional to organizations that have made impacts across the country. To say
exactly right.
that Nashville wants you to come and see, because we've had NCSL and SLC here, the Southern Legislative Conference and the National Conference of State Legislators, but to have the National Black Caucus of State Legislators here in 2023, of course, means so much to me. And so thank you for your work and your help to put other events that will be also coming here on the map, so that we can say to the world that Nashville is a welcoming place to attract folks and to say, you know, you might want to stay once you come here for the conference, or you may want to come back again and visit, because you may not have been able to get everything in your trip that you wanted to while you were here. So thank you again for that.
We want them. Thank you. Important for me to mention that there's no overhead expense tied to this funds. 100% goes back out. And in most instances, we're either putting additional cash directly with the event or in marketing the event. So it's not a one-off and it's not a profit source for us. We're happy to provide, happy to be the conduit, but all of it goes back out.
Representative Love, that sounded like a motion.
I'm not used to making motions on the council floor. And so that's why
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
I didn't want to do it. And so I will make the motion that we do accept this request.
Do a second. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I think I have to abstain, correct, Alex? But again, as everyone else said, the work you've done pre-pandemic, incredible. What you've done throughout the pandemic is even better for our city, so thank you.
I won't hold it against you. Thank you. And let me introduce Marie Sewing from our office. So Marie runs point on our diversity outreach, and she's been at all of these events and more. So important for y'all to know her as well. But, thank y'all very much.
Thank you, Butch, for being here today. All right, we will move on. As I mentioned at the very top of the meeting, if you hadn't caught that, there is a hard copy handout for our second item on the agenda from a request. Our Director of Economic and Community Development couldn't be here. We have Hannah Davis from the Mayor's Office, and you have the hard copy with the affordable housing request. So I'm going to welcome Hannah up here. I hope you all have had a minute to read through the request, but she'll give you an overview also.
Wonderful. All right, then I'll close this. Hello, everybody. I'm Hannah Davis. I'm the director of our housing programs, and I was really excited to get to be here today because myself and Ashley Brown, the director, she manages our Barnes portfolio, work tirelessly on affordable housing every day, and so always welcome the chance to come and share about our efforts and hear about ways we can improve, and certainly get the chance to request additional funds to be able to serve our city. So when we talk about affordable housing, I always try to remind people our vision is for high asset neighborhoods, economic integration, housing stability. A lot of people still picture kind of the housing, barrack style housing that you saw in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and that's not what we're looking at anymore. We're prioritizing beautiful design, transit access, accessibility, and moving towards even looking at the way that we're funding sustainability efforts through our portfolios. And the tool that, I originally joined on and Ashley manages now is the Barnes Housing Trust Fund. It's a really reliable funding source. It's really important for the work that we do. But with these ARP requests, we have the chance to continue investing in a proven tool and expand our toolbox. That is an essential part of our strategy to be really aggressive in meeting the housing needs of our city. So if you'll see this two-pager here, the first request is for something called a Catalyst Fund. And this would be a new tool for our city. It was recommended by the Affordable Housing Task Force that convened in the first 2 quarters of the calendar year. And the challenge, as I've laid it out, is you may have heard that we have a competitive housing market in Nashville. And just like what you see in the single-family market, what we see in the multifamily market is cash offers that are being made on apartment complexes, mobile home parks. And because of, our policy legislative framework in the state, we're not able to put a lot of protective measures in place. And so what we need to do is have a source of funding where we can be competitive with those same-day cash offers, but to keep them or make them affordable. And I think It's certainly something that we have been aware of. I've been here for the last 3 years. It's been a conversation, and we're seeing it accelerate. And some of that is, the economic growth that you see in the city, and then some of that has been exacerbated by the economic pressures that many of our neighbors are facing. COVID exacerbated that. And so when a property goes up for sale, people get, 30 days notice, and that disrupts their transit access, their neighborhood, what school their kids are going to, how they're getting to job. Could be the person who watches their kids, could be their, church family. So that building represents a lot more than just the bricks and mortar. And currently, Barnes is a wonderful tool. It's managed by the city, so it's very transparent, thorough. And we're not able to move in that quick, 15 days, let's put an offer down and retain these 200 units. Barnes serves a different function, but we need to have a tool that can move really quickly. So Metro, we're requesting $10 million in funding. And the way that we'll structure this is really to use that $10 million as a call to action. So the first step is we can put out an RFP to determine the best intermediary that's suited to manage this. Obviously, by having an intermediary manage it instead of Metro, they can move quickly. They'll have a preset screening factors, obviously affordability, but Metro can then influence, hey, we want to really prioritize transit access, or we really want to prioritize, being close to schools. We can kind of set our criteria. And then the intermediary can come and say, here's what we've seen be best practices in other markets. And then importantly, not only can they help manage it, but they can also go and recruit other investors. There are national philanthropic groups that fund affordable housing. There are local corporate partners that are interested in making donations or philanthropic investments. And by having a tool that's housed outside of Metro, we can kind of take advantage of that interest and actually turn it into dollars and cents, and most importantly, doors and homes for people. There's a couple of examples. I know the hyperlink on the hard copy doesn't necessarily help you. One thing that you'll see is in a lot of markets, it is a low cost debt fund. There's something in Tennessee called the community, I have it on here. The CITC, it's prime -4. It's kind of our housing world lingo. But what it means is that a lot of our affordable housing developers can access really low-cost debt already. What they need is equity in the deal to be able to help them then access that loan. But in the long term, those profits will come back into the fund. Right now, Barnes, again, in comparison, is very important. It goes to nonprofits, and they take that money and reinvest it in a different development. In this fund, the profits cycle back through the fund, and it's managed, and then they can go out under the discretion of the board of directors or the process that the Catalyst Fund sets up, invest in the further deals down the line. Do you guys find it helpful to break after each line item, or would you prefer if I explain all? Okay, great. So the next is what I'm really excited about. Almost all of the council members have contacted me about this. It's extremely challenging for people searching for a unit in this county. Ashley does an incredible job trying to service the dozens of calls a week that we get. I'm sure you receive them as well. And so the challenge is right now, residents who are seeking affordable housing, here's the process they have to go to. So they have to search every developer or provider's website. They have to search every property. They have to see if the property has a unit that's available that will meet their family size. Next, if you're using anything that's income qualified, you have to then see if your income qualifies. Does it qualify based on your last 3 paychecks, or did you work overtime last month? And so now you won't qualify, but you have to decide if perhaps you should forego working overtime so that you can qualify. And if you have to do that for, 15 to 20 providers, and it's an extreme time burden that we're putting on our residents who are already facing really dynamic and challenging economic pressures. And so what the solution that we're proposing is $200,000 to pay for licensing, technical assistance, and onboarding so that every single subsidized housing unit in the county is on a central, transparent, and accessible platform. So the same way that you can pop on Zillow and see if you got $1 million burning in your hole in your pocket, what home can I buy? We want that same level of service and technology available to our families and residents searching for an affordable unit. So some of our qualifications, we would want it to be available in multiple languages, of course want it to be mobile optimized. One of the things that we're still working on is addressing any other disabilities, so, sight and hearing challenges. Some of the providers we've spoken with have said they tend to find that those residents are already working with a social service provider that can then kind of help them with navigate. But again, we want to have the best technology platforms, and that covers as many residents' needs as possible. And so not only will they be able to pull up and see what unit's available, then they could have a centralized application. So you kind of think of if you've had your kids or you went through college, you used to apply to have 20 different applications, and then they centralized that application. So you can fill out one application for most schools. That's what we'd be looking for. All of our properties are gonna have little tweaks here and there, but 90% of that information is the same. It's your pay stubs, it's your tax forms, it's your household size. We don't need to have our residents making 20 copies of that, trying to fax it and submit it and track that information down. So by having a central application, then they then have choice as well to say, I'm interested in that property and I'll apply to that wait list. And instead of applying, meaning 100 different copies, it means the click of a button. So what I'm really excited about there is currently, as I referenced before, we have folks who get 30 days notice. Wow, what an incredible stress that puts on your family, and now you're having to make 20 calls, copies, faxes. We need to take down that time tax that we're putting on families and residents to say, we're investing in these units, but units only matter as much as they're accessible to someone. And so we're gonna go the next step to invest in technology beyond just the bricks and mortar to bring a more holistic housing navigation system to Nashvillians. And I'm not big on government has the best ideas, so seeing that other markets were using this, I went to our housing providers and said, hey, do you guys already have something that's really working? What would you think about this? They jumped on a call with one of the providers that exists. They kind of showed them a demo of how it would work, and our housing providers are doing great work. But these kind of technology investments are really challenging to make on your own and don't necessarily make sense to make on your own. This, I think, is a place where we can come in as the government and say, we are subsidizing these units, and so we need to make sure that they're all on the same platform so that everyone in our county has equal access to them. And then the last request is $10 million for the Barnes Fund. So nonprofit developers have multiple projects in the pipeline at any time, and the only bottleneck really is funding in terms of increasing that affordable housing supply. So an additional funding round will be invested in these developments that are ready to proceed, and they just need the equity that I referenced earlier to unlock that debt from a bank. On average, each Metro dollar into the Barnes Fund leverages an additional about $7 in either private, philanthropic, or state and federal funding. And the housing is affordable for 30 years. We just changed that from 20 to 30 years, which provides a really essential source of housing stability for neighborhoods. So we would be requesting that $10 million, and the grant round would be launched as early as 2022, obviously pending the approval from you all and the council. We have a current round that is already open, and awards will be finalized before the end of the year. But knowing that this request was a possibility, we have a lot of developers that are really interested in being able to apply in the spring. It is a lot of development is timing cycles, so the fall round doesn't always work. And, none of us want folks to just be waiting another year when we know how badly those units are needed. And just so you know, the structure of all Barnes Awards, that they're made in an open competitive process with review committee with all conflicts, no conflict of interest, and then voted on by our Housing Trust Fund Commission before they come to council for review. And the final contracts are structured on a reimbursement basis. So work is completed, inspected by a third party, and then reviewed by staff before the funds are dispersed. And so not only does this provide us a strong level of stewardship for public funds, we really value that responsibility, but we also get the chance to work really closely with our developers so that as they're facing challenges out there, instead of just writing them a check and say, make sure those units are ready for us in 2 years, they can say, hey, I've run into this snag, and we can help them either brainstorm or, they can talk to the commission, council, and see how we can address those challenges to make sure those developments keep moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. I think the Catalyst Fund is a great idea, and I'm excited about that. As a real estate agent, I understand the need for that. And then the centralized housing platform also. I've had several constituents, especially after the flood,
Yes.
that had nowhere to go, and I was at a loss because I was overwhelmed by. My eyes about popped. I was like, I've got no idea how to help you.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a major game changer. So I'm super excited about that. The Barnes Fund request, saying that the only holdback really is a bottleneck, or the bottleneck is for funding, is with funding. Where would this $10 million get you as far as like in the backlog?
Yeah.
And where I'm sort of going with that is, are you asking for $10 million because you think that that's the right amount when you really could use 20 or 25 or something like that? Or, you know what I mean? Where are we? What kind of an impact is this really going to make? And do you need more?
Well, I will always take more.
Yeah, right.
And I actually have, we have such a great housing community here. I'm always bragging about them. But they actually came together and created a centralized pipeline to be able to say, here's what we all have in progress. And I'm sorry I don't have that with me today, but I can follow up with you with that number. 10 million will get us usually between 400 and 600 units, always really varies based on what kind of land someone's been able to acquire. And so I would anticipate that 10 million would get us to about there. Across our portfolio, per unit, we're at about 20,000 of Metro subsidy. But with housing trust funds in general, the more money that is put in, the, we would either be able to fund more of the work that our folks locally already have in the pipeline, or we might start to attract regional folks who want to also compete.
I don't hear my echo. So I'm wondering, because, we have an issue with our unhoused neighbors, and that's obviously been forefront in the news lately. And affordable housing is huge on this council's priority list. I'm wondering if you were to go back and look to see, if it would be appropriate to increase that amount. I'm just sort of talking out loud, but, this our fund is such a gift, and that's the gift that keeps on giving is housing. And so I would tend towards maybe increasing that out the gate to really have an impact now, because obviously timing is of the essence as well. Does anybody else have a thought process on how that could be? Like if she could go back, Mary Jo, before the resolution was made and say, yeah, actually, if we were to bump it to 15 million or bump it to 20, that would be, an incredible gift, something to do it right the first time and just
Turned myself off too. From a timing perspective, we are not trying to hit the next council meeting, because that would have to have everything done by Friday. Tomorrow's a holiday. So we would have the time, but if we are going to make a recommendation, we do need to take a vote as a group. So I'm going to look for Alex, but I think we want to make that recommendation here. We can draft later, but I think we need to make the recommendation for the vote here.
on an amount. Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to interrupt, but can I make a recommendation perhaps, just based on some conversations I was having? So most of what Barnes funds tends to be around 30 to 60% AMI. It tends to be folks who are working lower wage jobs, but have been stably housed. And so that's where the majority of our nonprofit developers tend to focus. Obviously, there's variances in that based on, they might access a healthcare grant and they're going to do some permanent supportive. But permanent supportive tends to be its own focus and skill set. And those developers tend to also access other funds. And so what I would like to do is to come back and perhaps the December meeting, of course, I'll let the Metro folks in finance who manage this respect their agendas, but to be able to give you a better representative number on the needs from permanent supportive housing. I just came from a meeting where we're getting some HUD assistance to help us really understand the actual need. And since HUD is sending us funding, there are a number of pieces kind of in play there. And so I think we can put together a number that is pretty realistic. But in some ways, I don't want to say it's separate because all housing impacts each other. Sure. But the actual developers and grant process that we have set up now is not necessarily a fit for if we want to be really intentional about permanent supportive, which I think there's absolutely a place for.
Okay.
And we have said there is no one-time visit for anybody. I mean, we've even split some of the fire department and OEM requests and just said we're taking some of these critical, urgent issues first. We're going to have folks coming back. It could be a year from now. It could be 6 months from now. It could be 2 months from now that we would have folks come back. So thank you for waiting, Councilwoman Sepulveda.
Thank you, and thank you, Hannah, for working on this. So I had several questions, but I do think that one of the things that we do need to point out is in the draft guide, it had between 20 and 25 million in there. So we had planned for a little bit more. So I think you coming back and giving us an update would be great. So on the Catalyst Fund.
Yes.
So the RFP would go out and whoever the provider that is selected from that process would create a way to spend the 10 million, correct? And so it would be either they set up a board of directors or whatnot. So we wouldn't have oversight of that unless we put in something in the resolution that would create a reporting process and a way for that money to come back to us if it is not used by a certain period of time. Do you know in these other cities where that has been set up, if they have done something similar to that?
Yes, thank you. And this is a little bit chicken and the egg. So as I've talked to some of those peer cities, they've said like, well, we can spend some time researching your specific structures, if the city decides to fund it. So, based on the vote today, I think that would show a level of seriousness from our city. So we might get some more ideas. One, I think that oversight piece is really important because I can come to you and say, here are my intentions, but these are public dollars. And, we take our Barnes reporting really seriously. We have an annual report and the vice mayor appoints a council member to sit on our Housing Trust Fund Commission. One recommendation from one of our national partners that does some advising in the Southeast, they said that you could have council vote on an ex officio member. That way you have kind of eyes in the room, some transparency on how decisions are being made. And I want to be clear that this will not have the same, public meeting notice and all of those things because the point is to be able to move quickly. But even so, we want to come back and say, okay, one, here's the requirements up front, which certainly we can establish, and then here's how we delivered on those, so that it's not a, $10 million check written with no criteria. So I think there's a couple of things, that we could put in place. I could come back once we have the RFP. I could come back once we have the intermediary that's been selected. And I think anything that you would like to see could certainly go in the resolution so that it's binding.
Got it. Okay,
And
that's,
I believe that contract will have to go to council, is that
Yes.
correct? So you will see it, and the reporting requirements can be written into the contract.
great, thank you. And what was the name of the committee that recommended the catalyst plan?
Yes, our Affordable Housing Task Force.
And just for everyone who doesn't know, it was a committee created by the mayor, but there was also an appointment from the Homelessness Planning Council to that committee.
Yes, Dr. Shin was wonderful.
Yes. And so me, along with Councilmember Evans and O'Connell, sit on the Homelessness Planning Council, which Hannah was at this morning. And affordable housing was we can't talk about it enough. And during the budget cycle, when we had public hearings, one of the number one things that we heard from almost everyone who came and spoke before us was the need for affordable housing. Going back to my questions, under the new platform, the centralized housing platform, you said that the applications would be uniform. So Social Security numbers and people who are undocumented, because sometimes they come from different funding sources. I know sometimes they can't apply for certain things. So how would that be taken into account in the application process?
Yes, so we can add that. Basically, the central platform, centralized application will only have things that every provider is going to need. And so when we have providers who don't need a Social Security number, then that doesn't have to be on our, 90% list. Okay. What we're trying to avoid here is having to, when you go to the doctor's office and fill out the same form, your address, your name, blah, blah, blah. How can we centralize that? And then if they elect to join a wait list for a property that does require additional information, then they, elect that and fill out that information, but they're not filling that same information out over and over again.
Okay. Great, that's good to know, because sometimes people see that question on there and then think, well, I don't qualify, or this is a requirement. So that's great to know. And then how would all of this information be uploaded? It would be partnering with our providers to make sure that everything's listed, or do we already have a list?
We do have a list, but it's not, in my opinion, our residents, no matter what income level they deserve the kind of technology that we're all experiencing. DoorDash, I can choose my chicken wings and they can get here. So what that is going to be an additional step for our service providers, our housing providers, they are not used to that. And I acknowledged that this is going to be a big step, but people need to know what unit is available where and when. And they deserve that. They're receiving public funding for that. And so that is part of why I said that we would pay specifically for onboarding and technical assistance, because we know it's going to be a technology jump. And our providers have said, including Dr. White at MDHA, that they are excited to join this platform. But we know, anytime you use a new technology, having someone come and say, oh, okay, this, quirk, you have to do this here. So that is why we are going to require, going forward, if this were to be funded, in our Barnes contracts, in our pilot contracts, any Metro dollars that are used would require that you are doing real-time availability. And so that, we'll keep that compliance going kind of through spot audits. At the very beginning, I'm not looking to be punitive. If someone's really struggling with the technology, we want to help them get it right.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful to know, because my colleague during the flood, I had issues with trying to find people housing, and I was able to call Bill Freeman with Freeman and Webb, and he was able to provide short-term rental units, and I was able to send people that way. And so that would make the process a lot easier for a lot of us. And I know that it's still ongoing with some of the Dickerson Pike mobile home units, and they're trying to find affordable housing. So that is great. So thank you so much. Those are all my questions.
Let's see. Sarah Finley?
Yeah, just a couple of follow-ups to Councilwoman Sepulveda's questions. First, on the Catalyst Fund, the idea of it and the purpose of it obviously is very appealing. I'm struggling a little bit with actually how it would work and make an impact. We're talking about putting in $10 million, and then at that point, we hire someone to manage the fund and create a governance structure that we were just, obviously just talking about. But in terms of its purpose, to be able to move quickly to acquire land, how much money needs to be in it to really be impactful? You're talking about potentially high-profile land along transportation corridors. There's going to be a lot of money out there seeking that property. So I guess the question is, despite how fundamentally sound the idea is, what's really going to be needed for this to make an impact and to work? Because it sounds like that $10 million with sort of a ramp-up time is probably not going to be able to accomplish a lot without a lot of additional investment.
Yes, I mean, the goal is to get the fund up to 30 million, and that is what we had seen in those peer examples where, you have this call to action, you get additional investors. I am not going to say that 30 million is all we need to acquire all of the prime real estate in the city for affordable housing. To me, any of these developments that I read about in the news, that we all read about in the news, if we can capture a handful of those, they tend to be between 150 and 200 units. So that's 1,000 units that you're bleeding out every year, just for no other reason than the fact that we can't move quickly enough. And so to me, that's, unacceptable as a city. So we are not going to solve the problem completely, but without having the tool in place, we won't really even know what else is needed to be in the game, in the conversation. So the developers we're dealing with, though, they're already going to be bringing their own equity, some portion to piece the deal together. They're already going to have a line of credit. And so having this that they can, put down first while they piece all those other things together and then buy us back out. It took about 3 years, but one of our nonprofit, Urban Housing Solutions, worked with regions and multiple other partners on one deal, and it took a lot of work for them to bring all of that together. And in my opinion, that's what we as a government should be doing from a leadership perspective, to say, we can do that. We can be some of the first money in. We can put calls to our partners so that we're not placing that burden on one nonprofit to acquire one property. So, in terms of impact, it will depend on the size of the fund, where we end up, our ability to recruit partners and additional investment, the terms that we put out. But we might decide that it's worth to put, you will have fewer deals with higher level of equity in the deal because we want them to be, in prime real estate along transit corridors, or we may determine that we want to pursue more units. That will be a dynamic conversation, but we can get into those weeds once the city has shown the willingness to invest in this new tool.
And those conversations will take place among whoever is put in charge of this fund. Is that right? So we don't really know who the players will be in that.
Yeah, certainly
situation.
Metro staff, we will guide it, the Affordable Housing Committee chair. All of those conversations can be public, transparent, and then built into the RFP that goes out.
And then my final question is just on the platform, and the question just is the $200,000 going to get you where you want to go? How confident are you that will produce the product you're looking for?
This is a really interesting market, actually, which I'm sure almost no one here is interested in the sub-market of housing navigation softwares, so I won't spend too much time on it. But this is the reason you don't see technologies very often built for people without a lot of money. There's not a lot of options out there for this technology. So the technologies that do exist and are currently utilized are not strong performers. So that's why when I went out and was looking for even what's our ballpark number, that's why I reached out to a couple of technology platforms that I had either heard come recommended or were receiving strong reviews. They're still, improving their software because, they're not out of the box ready to go. In terms of, we would have to have continual feedback for them to customize it to our market. So in that way, to me, exciting to get to invest in a technology that can benefit our city over the long term. But the quotes that I heard were low end was 150, high end was 200. And that was I was explicit about the technical assistant and onboarding in person, so that they will come here and make sure that at that point in time, every subsidized unit in the county is online. Obviously, then the burden is transferred to us to ensure that that is maintained. A technology can't solve your problem. You have to really be able to commit to it. And that's why I wanted to talk with our housing providers to see if there was that commitment on their side.
Councilwoman Gamble?
Thank you, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely,
Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question about each part here.
Yes.
The Catalyst Fund, which thank you, piggybacking off of Councilmember Sepulveda and Ms. Finley, helpful getting a little bit more information about that, not familiar with that program, and even for the viewing audience. Just a comment on this one, the reporting and the, I guess, data analysis of how the money is used would be very important.
Yes,
so,
I agree.
And I'm not sure how we can incorporate that in the legislation that we bring forward, but I know there'll be questions about that. So however we can, as specific as we can be in presenting this, the better.
Okay.
For the centralized platform, this sounds wonderful. Thank you for doing this. We need this. Experience just like my colleagues here trying to find units for people. This would be very helpful. One question, you don't have anything in here for staff. So are you thinking that once the onboarding, everything is transferred, that you'll be able to maintain it or get support from the platform company or whatever that you need, that you don't need a staff person?
Yeah, so when I talked with our housing providers, they all have a staff person already that's doing this. They're just doing it on a very low performing platform, AKA an Excel spreadsheet. And so they said, we already have staff, if you could help get them trained on this new platform, then we have staff that will remain committed to that. And it's the same at MDHA. Okay. So since myself and Ashley don't maintain any properties, of course, we'll be there for troubleshooting, but the contract would include, technical assistance on an ongoing basis from whichever South Floor provider is selected, because I can assure you that it would be pretty painful if I was trying to provide that technical assistance. But from a staffing standpoint at Metro, we don't anticipate additional staff needed. That will be part of the contract, or our housing providers already are utilizing it.
Wonderful, thank you. And then the last question regarding the Barnes Fund, just wondering if there are any gaps that this particular funding could support. When in talking with Mac, with the rental assistance, knowing that a lot of the 80 to 100% median income folks are falling through the cracks, and wondered if you're experiencing the same thing when it comes to affordable housing, and if there's any way that can be addressed in this funding.
That's a great question. Actually, we could talk to our providers and find out, because you hate to see, you got a family who could qualify for home ownership and they're at 82%. That's not the purpose of the fund. I will say, and I will look into this, and Ashley's very thorough as well, so I know she will. Almost all of our providers are using state or federal funds that are extremely restrictive on that cap. But one thing we've really looked at is, housing trust funds are designed to be a creative funding source that the local entity can kind of mold to what's needed. And so I think that's an area where we know we can improve. One of our providers was talking about how he wants to, he specifically works to single-family head of household renters. And he said, I just really want them to buy the home in the end. So, and he said, but the Barnes contract isn't set up for that. And I was like, we would never want that to be the thing that stands in the way of someone being able to access that, and we can ensure that home stays affordable for still the 30 years. So that is one area where we want to see, yes, about 80% of the portfolio, it already is under really restrictive guidelines from state and feds. But on the parts that are not, how can we be more flexible to really achieve the goals that we have as a city? So I appreciate that, and I will look into that, and I'll see if there are areas where we can be a little bit more flexible. I know it's hard for our providers because they have such long wait lists, and that subjectivity can be challenging for them sometimes, but we have a great commission that oversees the fund that we could explore that level of flexibility with. Thank you.
I don't see, oh, Jose, let me get your mic.
Hello.
Hello.
Great to see you.
Always
Thank you.
wonderful
This
to
is
see you.
great. I'll try to articulate. The easy one is the centralized housing platform. I'm surprised something like that doesn't exist, and so that's fantastic. That's great. And if you can get it done for $200,000, that's fantastic. You know, when it comes to technology. Whew.
Yeah.
But hey, that's great. On I have some of the same concerns that Sarah's bringing up about the Catalyst Fund, and so to me, I'm trying to, okay, so how do I get comfortable with the idea? And to me, like, this falls into the bucket of, this is a innovative approach, doesn't exist, we're gonna plant the seed, we're gonna leverage, we're gonna see how it works, we're gonna be able to go out and tell the world this now. And to me, that connects with sort of what I've heard about what this fund that we're managing is intended to do, right? To try some things and leverage startup innovation. Because of that, is that okay? Then I feel comfortable saying, because I just don't see that this is the solution. I appreciate your comment about, all right, it's better than nothing, but it's also just a very small. And so while I appreciate the comments about needing more, that this isn't going to be enough, I also would want to see first how it gets deployed and installed before I have that, because I know very little about this, before I have the appetite to saying, yeah, let's just throw more money at it. But I will remain open to that possibility. The Barnes Fund, I think it's one of the best investments that the city makes, and so I'm happy to support that. Also, there's part of me that says, is really that enough? Would that be, do we need to be thinking about more? And yet, and that's a comment that I'm gonna make later, but yet I'm concerned about just the numbers that are flowing through the request, not your request, the general request, and how does that fit into the overall picture of the total funding that we have and all that. So I'm okay with just supporting the 10 million, even though I know that probably could be a lot more, and appreciate the leveraging power of the Barnes Fund. So those are my comments and questions.
Thanks.
Councilman Sepulveda?
Yes, as a follow-up to Jose's questions about Catalyst. So the Barnes Fund, we mainly work with our providers, and they help out with that, and they apply for Barnes funds. The Catalyst funds, who is applying for that? Just so I have that clarification. Will providers still be able to apply for those funds?
Yes. Well, again, can be. I would like to come to you with something that's super prescriptive already. But I know that our intermediary will want to, whoever manages it wants to be able to say what the best terms should be. I will say, I think that having, any developer, for-profit, nonprofit, in my opinion, we need all hands on deck to address our affordable housing challenges. So the main entity would be developers, and I might recommend, based on what I've seen, that they can apply whether they're for-profit or nonprofit. Barnes is open only to majority nonprofit deals, but we would want to structure it in a way that we, can be really competitive. And I will say, one thing that kind of informs on the size of the Barnes request is, with the active round that we have open right now, we'll be able to say, kind of, here's the demand for the money that we have, and the same with the round that we run in the spring. So, I'm glad to come back on the Barnes specific one and say, hey, 6 months from now, we ended up actually getting 40 million in requests, and we think, 35 of them are really shovel-ready, valuable projects, and, here's an additional request or information. Yes, of course. Reverend Love? Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
Representative Love.
Oh, yeah, you're in charge.
You are too. No, you.
Well,
No, you.
I didn't know if the question had been answered. I just thought about this, so pardon me for belaboring the point. Would someone potentially be able to tap into both Catalyst and Barnes for a project?
Yes, this is one of the main questions that I've posed as I've looked at other funds. I think something that I'm trying to balance the desire to have our new tools not overlap at all, because we want all new units, with also acknowledging that it's an incredibly, pressurized and intense marketplace. And so we may need folks who need to access the Catalyst Fund, but once they get their debt, they can pop that money right back out, or they need the equity until the, doors are open and they're getting operating income. So I have seen models where they have something that is structured in both of those ways, where you have, your Catalyst secures the property, and then Barnes comes in and is actually the long-term equity if it is a nonprofit.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That's great thinking.
All right. I don't see any other hands for questions. Is there any other conversation, or do we want to make a motion for recommendation? I have a motion. Any second? I see a second. Okay, great. Sorry.
Oh,
All in
phew, I was-
favor? Any noes? Any abstentions? Okay, so we have a total, and I will tell you, as the committee, we've just been attaching these requests as the exhibits, so that's why we haven't had to spell out so much in written detail for the resolutions. So, again, just repeating, this was $20,200,000 for affordable housing as included in the attachment. Councilwoman Sepulveda.
Can I lead that resolution?
Yes. Thank you.
On the resolution, I think some of these questions that we've asked about the Catalyst Fund, I think it would be really helpful if we had some specificity to just sort of say on this basis that we're going to fund it for $10 million, to me is not, sufficient.
yeah.
I think we need to have a little bit more detail around what we're trying to accomplish here and how we intend to go forward and then oversee it. Because it is, as Jose said, it's a chance to do something innovative, but we don't want to just do it and then not have any sense of what happens to it.
Absolutely. Do I have the chance to? Okay, then I will gladly put together some detail that would be included in the resolution. I don't know if proper procedure would be to send it to you all for your review, even though the vote's being held here.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll actually, I think, use this request form to add the substance there. Some of it will also be in the whereases, which talks a lot about the why and how, and then, but we'll, I think, update the details in the request, and that way it's incorporated into the resolution.
Wonderful.
And then, yes, we send these back out for review.
Okay. I appreciate that guidance. I agree. I would not want the conversation to get lost, and I want to minimize the sense of risk as much as possible so that folks appreciate that there would be a strong level of oversight, even though it is a new tool. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you,
everybody.
Hannah and Ashley. All right. We have two other requests coming from General Services. We have Velvet Hunter from who is our General Services Assistant Director. And I'm going to let Velvet decide which order she wants to take them in. I think we have other guests to talk about the fleet, so maybe for the sake of time, are we doing fleet first? Okay. Both mics down there are live.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Velvet Hunter. I'm the interim director for General Services. And with me up here today is Stacy Wall. He is our assistant director for fleet management. And importantly, in our audience, we've got Chief Taylor and Chief Gordine from the police department. They're here to support this request and to answer any questions we have about police operations. And John Honeysucker, are you back there? Yeah, from Water Services Waste Management is also here to support the request and answer any questions we have about his operations. So thank you guys for being here. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to present the request for funding for additional fleet for several metro agencies. As a quick overview, our General Services Office of Management manages over 3,600 vehicles and pieces of equipment from procurement through disposal. And we also operate 4 fuel sites and manage a fuel card program, which allows agencies to purchase fuel from retail stores. Regarding the request for ARP funding, we've worked with the metro agencies to identify the immediate need for 142 new additional vehicles. 128 of those are for the police department, 10 are for NDOT, and 4 are for the sheriff's office. And the estimated purchase cost for those 142 vehicles is $9,069,000. In addition, the request includes 13 additional trash trucks to be rented for a 6-month period, and the cost for that is $2.4 million. I believe the packet provided to you includes the breakdown of fleet additions by metro agency and the justification as it relates to preparing for, mitigating, and responding to the impacts of COVID-19. So I won't read those to you, but at a high level, the additional vehicles will allow NDOT to social distance by reducing their crew size from 4 people to 2. The sheriff's office will be able to social distance inmates as well as family, friends, and lawyers being transported. And the 6-month rental of 13 trash trucks will help ensure timely trash collection and avoidance of a public health issue. This need is a direct result of the global shortage of parts and resulting delay in repairing Metro Water Services trucks, with COVID being a major contributor to that shortage. The additional vehicles for police will reduce COVID risk in several ways. First, social distancing. Vehicles will be staffed by 1 rather than 2 officers. Will reduce exposure risk for not only the officers, but those being transported by the police department. And when there is a COVID positive case, additional vehicles will allow us to take the vehicle out of service for decontamination with less impact to police operations. Also, additional vehicles removes the obstacle of space limitations for PPE and avoids the use of shared PPE. So that's brief, but I'm happy to answer questions that you have about this fleet request, and of course the others I'm sure will too.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out why I have too many mics open. Councilwoman Sepulveda.
Great, thank you, and thank you for being here today. The trash truck rentals, those are to address the Red River situation, is that correct?
Actually, it's to provide that service because some of the trucks are out of service now for repair.
Okay.
The Metro-owned trash trucks are out of service for repair. Right.
Got it. And some of those trucks had picked up the Red River routes?
John Honeysucker saying, no, it's not for Red River. Mm-mm.
Can John talk to that specifically?
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. Okay, Council Sepulveda, the big truck rental, those are not for Red River. That's totally separate. This is just for the Metro aspect of it. Red River is a contractor for the residential trash collection. So the big truck rental, as Ms. Hunter was saying, that is to support because of the fleet and with the industry standard, what's going on with fleet right now, and they're doing the best they can because we're beating up Stacy, and Stacy's doing a fantastic job of just trying to just keep us afloat. But with the resources that they have and the conditions of those trucks, we had no choice but to rent the vehicles in order to get those off of the road, because Stacy will attest one of the prime key things in Ms. Hunter's and Director Potter's the same way. We believe in employee safety. And they recognize issues that are safety-prone issues, and we don't want to risk anyone's life by having those vehicles on the road. So I truly support the move to remove those off of the street. And my task was to find a company that we could rent from in order to get those in. And around the country right now, production of those trucks is taking 2 or 3 years. I had to find the first available. I called around this country, from Florida to Ohio out to California. And this is the only company that had availability for us to get those trucks in. And they have been sending them in at the rate that they were able to supply us with.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I agree with the immediate need of that. Lord knows that John hears from us several times throughout the weeks when our trash is not picked up, and staffing safety is very important. And I know that is a big issue. And for those who aren't council members, it's tough. It is one of the toughest things that several of us have to deal with, especially some of the Southeast folks, like my colleague. So I would rather take that issue separate from the rest of the ask, because like I was saying, and like Jose had mentioned some time ago, I'm getting to the point where I'm going to be making my decisions on immediate needs, and some of these are immediate needs, but I would feel more comfortable taking up some of these items when we're also addressing how we are addressing police and police reform, because that was another agenda item. And to be fair in that process, I wouldn't feel comfortable voting for the other aspect of this, but I would feel comfortable voting for the immediate need of the trash trucks.
I'm happy to separate the two if the committee wants to go ahead and right now speak only of the rental trucks. I think in your packet you'll see that is summarized at the $2,380,640. It is for the 13 trash trucks for 6 months. It also includes some of the additional operating expenses that would be incurred in that time frame. Are there any other questions on that particular item? Sean Henry, let me get your mic. Here we go.
What would the purchase amount be, those same trucks, instead of renting them for 6 months?
Yeah, so the front loader is about $8,000 a month, and the purchase price for that is $332,000. And then the roll-off is $55,000 a month, and that includes fuel maintenance as well as the operator, and the purchase price is $162,000 for that equipment. But a couple things, we can't get them quickly is probably the main thing to say, but I also should add that we do have 9 that we ordered. Can't remember when the order was submitted, but we're hoping, and all indications are that we'll have those 9 trucks in June 2022, sometime between there and January 2023. So we have made progress thanks to the council and the approving of the funding to get 9 ordered, and then this new capital spending plan before council includes 10 additional trucks. So we definitely haven't abandoned the thought that we need to purchase. This is just to get us through a few months.
Councilwoman Johnston.
Thanks. I know that we have all of our trucks, I think right now are being repaired. Are they being repaired, or have they just been sent out to pasture, so to speak?
It's a mixture.
A mixture. Okay. So at some point we will have some of those trucks come back online.
Absolutely, yeah. They're in for repair right now, and they're not all off the road, but there is a substantial number. John is exactly right. There's a substantial number that's in the shop for repair, and those repairs are just slow right now.
Yeah. Okay.
For labor and parts.
Okay. Thank you.
But they should all be back on the road.
Councilwoman Gamble?
Thank you. My question evolves around, I guess, Councilmember Sepulveda's request about separating the general services request based on, I guess, the trash services and then other. In the other category, where you're requesting vehicles for NDOT, MNP, well, I guess the MDOT, the water trucks are they're trash trucks, but they fall under the water department, are the rental trucks. But the other trucks for NDOT, MNPD, and DCSO, are we in a position where if we delay any action on those, because of shortages and things like that, would that hinder us in any way? Is anyone here from any one of those departments that can talk specifically about that need?
I'll let Chief Taylor speak to the police department's needs. The other vehicles are a little different because they are additions to the fleet, mainly to allow for social distancing. The water is a temporary solution. It's not really additions to the fleet. It's because their vehicles are in repair status right now. So it's a little different. But Chief Taylor, if you want to talk about the urgent need for additional.
The reason it's such an exigent circumstance for us with vehicles is Chief Drake's emphasis on community engagement and having more officers in neighborhoods. What we've done is we're, effective this February, are going to go from 389 officers in patrol settings to 500. And then on top of that, that 500 is going to be going from an 8.5-hour shift 5 days a week to 4 10-hour shifts. The reason we're doing that is that creates a little force multiplier with the overlapping shifts. What we've looked at and we've said our most violent crime, robberies, murders, shootings, rapes, all happen in the evening. We know those specific hours. It's around 9 to 3. So what we've done is because of this staffing model, we're able to double the number of officers that are going to be during that time, responding to calls, being available. A fantastic setting. And like I said, it puts 112 more officers in there, and then during those times it doubles that number. The problem is our current, and Stacy and Ms. Hunter have been fantastic in how innovative they are. We're keeping older vehicles on, doing repairs, whatever we can. The problem is we literally have shared cars right now that with the 8.5-hour shift never turn off. Somebody gets in the morning, and then that same guy gets in the next day, and it never stops running. Well, with the overlap and the force multiplier, we can't do that. We won't be able to have the shared cars in the same form or fashion because we just don't have enough cars. So for us to be able to do this, and again, it's amazing the difference when we look at the numbers that we're going to have of officers in communities, in neighborhoods, just out there ready to respond to calls for service. But we have to have the cars to do it. In fact, the manpower part, we're making work. We're pulling from different areas of the department. The cars, there's nothing we can do about. We've got to have those, ma'am.
Sorry.
Hello. Thank you. One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
The number that you're requesting, the 148, is that the number that you need to accommodate for the extra, I guess, 200 officers that will be on the street? Is there any, I mean, is that above and beyond? Is that the minimum that you need, or what?
No, ma'am, it's not enough because right now we have detectives that don't have cars and they drive their own cars in when they're on call for the weekend. We're short vehicles, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just the nature of what happens. But no, ma'am, that makes a big dent in it, but we're still short cars for a multitude of people.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And then move on.
I'm so sorry.
If we can hear, is anybody here from, John, did you want to speak to the other ones? NDOT?
Actually, not NDOT, but on the water side for the water trucks. And I think Stacy and Ms. Hunter has explained that pretty good. In regards to the rentals, we're not increasing the staff of our fleet. We're just supplementing that right now in order to give a chance to take some pressure off them to allow them to service the vehicles that we currently have. As they service that, and again, Stacy is in constant communication, and I appreciate that, with us to give us daily updates on the fleet that we have had in the shop. for some periods of time. And again, the communication is great. The administration has been very, very supportive of what we're working through right now. And we really want to, with this time that we have the rentals, it gives us a chance to prep give fleet a chance to get the equipment in operating condition, because as you know, starting next year, we'll go to every other week recycling. We really need that equipment to be in operating condition at that time.
Thank you. And is anyone here from DCSO?
Actually, I spoke with DCSO and NDOT. They were the smaller requests, just to kind of understand what their justification is. So I'll do my best to answer any questions. Both of them, it was just about social distancing in their operations and being able to reduce, like I said, for NDOT, that crew size from 4 to 2. So these are additional vehicles for NDOT, and same thing with DCSO, so that they could they have vans sometimes with family, friends, lawyers, and just need to keep people, fewer people in a vehicle, and that's how it would help them.
And actually, that does fall within the priorities for this funding. And so I guess, I'm at the will of the body here, but I think that we should take this request as it is and not separate it out. I mean, if we want to have separate resolutions for it, then I don't know if that's an option, but considering the urgency and the fact that these requests do fit or fall within the priorities for the ARP funding, I'd like to see us take an action on them today.
Councilwoman Sepulveda?
Great, thank you. There was a question from someone that wanted to know if these trash trucks are going to meet our electrification requirement.
They're not electric vehicles.
Okay. Because there's something within the code. I'm looking at it right now, and maybe legal could look at this. It's under Ordinance BL 2011-938, and it's number 2.32.065 Fleet Electrification Program. So I don't know if this is a requirement or if this is something that we have asked for.
We are very familiar with that electrification requirement, and we have until 2025, but 20 to get to the, beyond that to get to 100% electrification. 2050 to get to a complete electrification. So we are working toward that, but certainly not. We've got to have the infrastructure to support electric vehicles as well. So we're all working on that, but we've got until 2050 to meet that requirement.
And the new trash truck purchases, would they meet that?
They are not electric. The ones on order are not.
Okay, so at some point we would have to figure that out to meet that. Okay.
Yes, correct. We've got a plan we are familiar with the legislation, and we have a plan to electrify the fleet. We're really focusing on the infrastructure now. We're starting with, we do have, I think, 14 electric vehicles.
One CNG roll-off truck.
Yeah, and a CNG roll-off truck, but we've got, toward the electrification, we've got electric vehicles. They are mostly, or I guess they're all sedans that have accessibility to electric car charging stations.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
I would still like to take them separately. I think we're going to run into the problem we ran into with our last parks resolution, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. But I think we're going to have another problem on the council floor, and it could potentially be contentious. So if the body doesn't want to separate them, then that's up to the body, and I'll just vote accordingly. But I'd feel more comfortable if they were separated, but it is ultimately up to the majority of my colleagues, so I will respect that.
Are there any, Sarah?
Yeah, one is just a technical question. I mean, obviously, I know it's painful for you all, and it certainly is for us seeing this, to think about this amount being spent for rental, a fleeting type of, pardon the pun, but a fleeting type of expense. When does the 6 months start, and is it really going to bridge until we have the replacement vehicles?
Well, I think it'll start as soon as the funding's available, and we do think it'll bridge 6 months, but the water department has been conservative. I'm looking at John, they've been conservative, and it wouldn't be accurate to say that there's no possibility that it wouldn't be needed beyond 6 months. We could be back.
And I guess the question is there, I mean, maybe there's just no chance that we actually would be able to get vehicles back in service in a way that we could save some of this, or are we committing to it on the 6 months, even if we did not need the entire amount for the full time?
That's a good question. And we will have a contract with the vendor, and I think that term will be 6 months. Is there a cancellation provision, John? Early termination?
It is. It is.
Okay, so we could cancel if they weren't needed.
And I'm assuming it would be a partial cancellation potentially if we got some vehicles back and maybe not others. I'm just
Right.
trying to make sure that it sure would be painful to be paying for something and then
Not needed.
have access to our own vehicles in that same time frame. With respect to the resolutions, I guess the question is, you know, not being a council member and not knowing exactly what the amount of discussion might be, I'm certainly comfortable voting on both subject matters, but if it makes sense to have separate resolutions because we think one may be tabled and one may not be, and maybe that's just form over substance, but I'm just trying to defer to our council members on what would be the most likely way to have these matters adequately considered by council.
Yeah. Councilwoman Gamble?
Thank you. Just a little context on the parks resolution that we passed or recommended at our last meeting. It was deferred on the floor because of concerns about the cameras. And since then, an amendment has been introduced to take the camera, it was like $480,000, something like that, out of the parks budget in order to move it forward. And in the bulldozer?
Yeah.
480 is the bulldozers and the cameras.
Do have the amendments
Okay.
to discuss later, but that's
So-
very helpful right now. Thank you.
So there is a possibility that there could be some changes made to the resolution, or that it could be deferred based on concerns that some might have about any of the fleet items. So I think maybe if we take them as a separate resolutions, that would be fine. We presented 4 resolutions at the last meeting. So, but I think that we should make a recommendation. I don't think we should take one out and just do nothing on the other ones. We should decide one way or the other on all of them, and then if we want to do separate resolutions, then that would be fine.
Yep.
Helpful because it just, I mean, the needs for trash pickup and this sort of stopgap measure is just so unrelated to police vehicles. It just seems odd to think that you would, in effect, hold one, up because of a much bigger issue that could be discussed with council.
Why don't we, if there are no other questions, is there a motion for recommendation for the rental trucks for the trash pickup? Second? All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? You vote in favor of recommending, I don't have the number right in front of me, $2,386,40, I think is the number. I'll get that right. Then, are there any other questions on fleet, or is there a recommendation motion to move that forward? Got a recommendation in a second. All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, you recommend the purchase of, I'm sorry, I just locked out of my online, of the police vehicles, including NDOT and Sheriff's Office. And the amount was $9,069,614. Thank you very much. Velvet, I guess you're not going anywhere because our last specific request for funding this evening is for our HVAC, various systems.
Stacey.
Thank you, Stacy.
I'm going to switch experts, though.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And this is Randall Jones. He's our Assistant Director for Building Operations. And we appreciate the opportunity to be here today to present the request for funding for CDC recommended ventilation improvements in metro buildings. As background, General Services is responsible for the day-to-day management, maintenance, and repair for 93 metro facilities. Several other metro agencies have facility management teams as well, including Sheriff's Office, Health, Library, NDOT, Fire Department, Parks, and the Metro Action Commission. The ARP funding request before you includes HVAC upgrade needs identified by those various facility management teams across Metro. Regarding improving ventilation, Metro's facility managers have been tracking the CDC recommendations closely, implementing recommendations where possible, and researching various technology solutions really since the beginning of COVID. We've increased outdoor air ventilation, total airflow supply. We've upgraded HVAC air filters to help further mitigate the transmission of infectious aerosols. We've checked and regularly monitored restroom exhaust fans to ensure that they're functional and operating at full capacity. And we're running the HVAC systems at maximum outside airflow for 2 hours before and after occupied times in order to flush buildings. We do have a dedicated team of HVAC professionals to proactively manage our system settings, system cleaning and disinfection, filter upgrades and changes, and other HVAC-related issues. So in summary, we've done what we can with available funding, and ARP funding would allow us to further improve ventilation by implementing a variety of solutions recommended by the CDC, such as replacement of units, installation of UV lighting, and adding portable HEPA units. The best improvement solution is determined on a case-by-case basis by building maintenance staff and licensed HVAC professionals. These are the folks with knowledge of the air handling unit's condition and performance, as well as the layout and intended use of the space served by the unit. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Representative Love, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And my question and concern is really just about some of what we discussed with the last presentation about availability of parts and other things. In light of that, how soon do you think you would be able to put these repairs in place and get these buildings up to the level where they should be, if approved?
So that's a really good question, and the answer is kind of across the board, because some of the improvements are portable units with HEPA filters and UV lights, and we've had some success in getting those fairly quickly. And so I know our Metro Action Commission, that's a solution that they're interested in implementing. Then we may have a more comprehensive solution in another facility that requires lots of parts, lots of labor, and that would take longer than it would have in the past. There's no doubt about it. So some of the solutions are quicker than others.
Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got one quick question. Looking at this list of expenditures, should we look at this, that when these amounts are spent for the equipment and the installation of the equipment, and you've got this annual operating amount, is that a net amount over what would already be in the budget? Because presumably whatever we have now has an annual operating component. So has that been netted out, or is this just what it would cost for these new ones sort of in a vacuum, so that we in effect have, are paying for operating costs that are already presumably covered by the budget?
Well, that's a really good question, and let me first say these are just estimates, but we do expect there will be some increase. There will be parts that weren't there before. There will be maintenance that wasn't there before. Filters will be more expensive than they were before. So we could see a potential increase, even though we may have the same number of units and the same facilities.
And if I may add, one of the things that we've talked about as a committee is not using ARP funds for ongoing recurring costs. So the request for this particular item you'll see is just for the equipment and installation. And as that equipment and installation comes into play, there will be increase, as Ms. Hunter just said, there will be increases in operating costs, and those will be accounted for, in the current year budget and then going forward in future budgets. But we didn't ask for the ARP funds to cover those operating costs because we don't want to find ourselves in this position of kind of that cliff at the end of the ARP funding where all these new operating costs.
Okay, that's helpful. I wasn't clear that the 579 was not being asked for. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yep.
Just one on the incremental operating expense. Well, first, thanks for being here, both of you, and preparing all this work. Aren't there offsets and savings as well, especially when you're replacing and repairing so many units? They'll run more efficiently. That'll be there by converting different rooms to just have fan circulating instead of the whole system being on. Is that 579 net, or does that only account for more expensive filters and perhaps more utility?
It really just accounts for the more expensive things. For example, all the UV lights that will be added, they're not there now.
So this is all the expendable replacement expense that's an ongoing?
Yes.
Okay. And then have there been corresponding savings contemplated in energy expenses, or?
No, we didn't account for any savings.
Thank you.
For the most part, these upgrades don't involve replacing equipment. There are a few exceptions, but it's mainly upgrading, adding the needlepoint bipolar ionization or the UV lighting or portable units. So don't anticipate a large energy savings.
Any other questions or a motion to recommend? Got a motion, a second. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. You recommend. If I may come back to the fleet recommendation and back to the very first one with NCVC, if I could get one of our council members to take fleet or NCVC. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't turn your mic on. Thank you. Councilmember Gamble, you're going to do. Okay. Great. So I have as our sponsor for affordable housing, Councilwoman Sepulveda, the truck rentals, Councilmember Johnston indicated with Alex she would sponsor that. And thank you, Councilmember Gamble, for fleet and the cultural diversity events. Yes, your mic is on.
Thank you. Two things. Can all the council members be listed except for the one I abstained on?
Yes.
And then there was an ask if the votes could be read because people can't, some people online didn't see or hear how many in favor, how many against for the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And just for today, we had 8 of our 9 council members. So in all cases where we didn't have any no's, it was 8 in favor, 0 against. We had an abstention on the very first by Mr. Henry, conflict, just to avoid conflict of interest, and an abstention on the fleet from Councilwoman Sepulveda. So in that case, it would have been 7 in favor, 0 against, 1 abstention. Okay, thank you. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you, committee members, for your good questions. I hope that the public and our council members appreciate the level of questions and the, always the intention to really thoroughly vet these requests and make sure that we understand what we're actually recommending for funding. So thank you for that. On the agenda, I'm going to go a little bit out of order if that's okay. We talked about it briefly, so I don't think that we have to spend too much time. But as Councilwoman Gamble did give you kind of a preview, so there were 5 resolutions, 5 recommendations that we made at the last oversight meeting, and one of them included the 1.9 million for parks. That was a combination of purchasing equipment that could be used in debris removal and other, tasks that our park system use in all of our parks. And let me tell you, I know they used it a lot after our storms and cleanup. The second component of that 1.9 million were cameras in some of the other metro parks, and the third item in that was basically a capital renovation and restoration from some of the damage at Brookmead. And as indicated, we have received 2 amendments. One actually is amending to eliminate the equipment purchase, and the second amendment is actually requesting to eliminate the cameras. So our council, our Metro Council attorney sent those to me today, and we talked a little bit about the role of this committee when there is a reduction in the funding recommended. I don't think, but I want this committee to weigh in, I don't think the committee has to necessarily approve a reduction. I think what you have done is approved the recommendation, and the recommendation remains valid by this committee. If the reverse happened and an amendment was made to increase the funding to something that you had previously recommended, I believe that should come back to the committee because it is an indication of more funds. So as we move forward, as indicated today, there could be questions and different requests, different recommendations that you make for funding may be received differently on the council floor. If they are reduction, I don't know that this committee has to come back and approve a reduction. You have actually already approved the recommendation. The committee would be asked to come back and recommend any increases that came through the council floor. I know we have a question, and your mic is on.
Thank you. Just to give a little bit more perspective and information, it was a big issue for the council, and that's why it was deferred one meeting. After that, there were scheduled tours by the administration to go to specific parks to, in my words, spectate homelessness and make a decision that way. And there are several people upset, including some of our organizations that helped with homelessness. And there have been letters written, and there has also been an ask from some of those organizations like Open Table, who have asked council to disapprove the bill in its entirety. So there are 2 amendments, and like Mary Jo said, these amendments didn't have to come to us. The sponsors decided to send them to us because they wanted to give this committee the opportunity to weigh in again. And we had a situation during the CARES Act where there was a council member who didn't go through the committee and was going to propose something on the floor, and several of us pushed back against that, and that was stopped. There's nothing really prohibiting them from allocating this money without coming to us. Is that correct? Like, we set up the committee to recommend.
So similar to what you're referring to with when there was the CARES Act funding, when there was a recommendation on the floor, a council member filed a resolution to request funding from the CARES Act, and we had that come back to the committee. It did not move forward. It is really the intention that recommendations come from this committee. So recommendations for use of funds, for funding, come from this committee.
Yeah, and that council member people spoke to him to send it back to the committee.
Yes, so all funding recommendations, once the committee was put in place with the CARES Act, came through the committee.
So the council members who have the 2 amendments didn't have to send it to us, but they chose to send it to us because it is important that this committee that was created to have oversight still have a say in that. So I would encourage us to still weigh in on that. And now that I get to the part of me weighing in, I really have a hard time with surveilling homeless people. It's not a crime to be homeless. I feel like the money could be used for other things, such as housing homeless people, such as creating programs where we help them if they have, mental illness, to find jobs, to put them in programs such as that. I don't see this as solving anything. It's more reactive. And as far as the heavy equipment that was in there, in the description, it said it was to remove debris from homelessness camps. Well, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that they're going to just bulldoze through the encampment. I would hope that wouldn't happen. I doubt that would happen. But I feel that there are better uses for these funds, and these amendments will come to the council body. I support these amendments. I sit on the Homelessness Planning Council. We had a meeting this morning, and there were several people who are very upset who are part of several organizations that do this for a living who were not advised beforehand. And so I guess this is a way for us to think going forward that there are going to be situations like this, and that there are parties that needed to be brought into the loop to make sure that we were on the correct path. It is ultimately up to the committee. I have signed on as a sponsor of the 2 amendments. I would encourage my fellow committee members to support these amendments.
I think one of my concerns of having a rediscussion is that we don't have folks from parks, we don't have folks from the administration to perhaps balance the conversation. So you heard from them at the original conversation and recommendation, and my concern to having a conversation without them here is that it's important that we have 9 committee members and all those voices are heard together. So, Sean, you grabbed your microphone. I'll come back.
I'm a little confused. At the council meeting, an amendment was made, but our recommendation still supports the purchase of X. Are they re-voting on that? They deferred at one meeting?
So the resolution for 1.9 million was deferred in total. Now there are 2 amendments. One reduces the recommendation by the purchase of the equipment.
Of the heavy equipment and the cameras.
And then a separate one reduces the recommendation by the cameras. What will happen on the council floor at the meeting when they are heard is that the council members will vote on each amendment. So it's possible that the council members could then vote in favor of both amendments, which would essentially eliminate both sections of that funding. They could vote for, there could be a vote that they don't approve that amendment, and so the 1.9 million goes through.
Yep, I got it. And then at the very beginning, you suggest that if we recommended $100 for X program, they reduced it to 75, we shouldn't have to reapprove that. But I do want to challenge that a little bit, because there have been a few cases where someone submitted an application for $50, and we thought it would be better approving $100, and this was why, X, Y, and Z. if it stayed at the $50, we might not have approved it as a committee. We were approving the
Okay.
heightened expenditure. So I do think if council were to reduce it, I think we should revisit it. I wouldn't want to be responsible for recommending X, Y is approved, then we're clean. Otherwise, we're not a committee.
Yep. No, I understand in that context of,
And I don't want to make more work for you,
No.
for Alex,
I
or
am
the
here to serve.
poor counselor on city council,
yeah.
or for us. But I just think it won't happen very often, but that 1 or 2 times it happens, it will be for significant dollars. Today, for example, we were thinking about taking a $10 million request, at least it was discussed, making a 15 or 20 or 25, a major amount of money for someone else then to change it, so.
Yes. That makes sense. So my only concern then of discussing those amendments today is not having the right parties here. So. Councilman Gamble
Do we
first.
actually have the amendments? We don't have the amendments.
I didn't send them. I received them.
And we don't have, because our recommendation was based on the parks director's request. And so I agree that having a discussion about it amongst us without having the person who requested the funds here is probably not appropriate. But, and to speak to the amendments, I think that's something for the council to discuss. I mean, I think we've made our recommendation, and two council members have submitted, I mean, we made a recommendation, presented a resolution, and then council members have the authority to present amendments or alternatives for the council to discuss, but I'm not sure how that goes back to this committee, or if it should go back to this committee to discuss when it's a council action.
So my initial, this is just, my initial thought was the same as yours. What I appreciate, what Sean just shared is, one of the things that I appreciate about this committee is the depth for which you hear the information and ask the questions. And I could imagine, I'm not going to make an example off the top of my head, but I could imagine a situation where if the request was for $1 million and somebody said, well, that just sounds like too much, I want it to be 500,000, but you as committee members know that that 500,000 isn't going to be effective, that the 500,000 is really now, I hate to use it, a waste. So and that made sense to me. I think that's what you were implying, is that there could be a situation where a lesser amount would not have passed to this committee, because it wasn't just a matter of, well, it's less, so why should that matter? It may go back to your understanding of hearing from the knowledge experts that the amount was intentional at that amount. So I see both sides of the coin and how they could both come into play, and I don't know that we have, I don't know if there's a one-size-fits-all solution, so.
And is there something in the legislation or the ordinance that established this committee that addresses that?
No, I'll read the words verbatim, that this committee will issue reports upon and review the use of funds as it deems appropriate. It will collect, consider, and recommend appropriate uses of the ARP funds as designated by the Metro Council Disbursement Plan. The committee will submit reports and recommendations to the mayor, director of finance, and Metro Council. So it really doesn't speak to what happens when something comes back to the committee. I don't know, Alex, do you have any thoughts? And then I'll get to, I know we have 2 more questions out there. Oh, sorry. That's you.
Yeah, I think as a committee, you can do what you want to on that. If you could vote collectively that you want to look at that, or you could vote to let your initial recommendations stand. So it's really up to you all.
And could they take them on case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't have to be a permanent rule that you have going forward. It could be just considering this particular set. But since there is a difference of vote on it, I think it would be proper to have a vote about whether you want to consider it. I think that would be appropriate.
Thank you. I've got Councilwoman Sepulveda and then Representative Love.
Thank you. And I hear my colleagues' concern. I guess this is a good example of a good test run of how we want to approach this if it happens again. And deciding from this point on. I know that when I called our lawyer at the council office, that the resolutions had been sent over to Mary Jo, and I think that was just today. So granted, it only gives a limited amount of time, but the mayor's office is also right downstairs, and we could also call Director Odom. I feel like there's a way to figure that out if we want to go that direction where we take up the item today. We could put things in place. But if in the future that is not what we want to do, and letting our colleagues at the council know, hey, don't send any amendments back to the committee, we'll just discuss them on the floor. I think it's important to figure out what direction we're going to go with at the end of the day.
Jose Gonzalez. Oh, sorry. Representative Love?
Is there anything that prevents us from deferring a conversation about this particular item until the next meeting?
No, there is nothing to, we can absolutely do that.
And that would give, I think, time for
Director Odom
to be here and for us to understand the complexity of what we are also dealing with. That would be my question and possible recommendation if we could.
The timing is always kind of the issue. In this case, it was a coincidence. I mean, it's a bit of a coincidence that we have a committee meeting today. We only meet once a month. If we had brought everybody back in, we could have deliberated today and we would have known for next Tuesday's council meeting. By not discussing it today and having it on our December agenda, it could, I don't want to say will, but it could then, our communication back to the council members who sponsored the amendments would be, the committee wasn't able to take up your amendment, so they would have to defer that amendment and defer the funding until the next council meeting subsequent to our next committee meeting.
Yeah, I want to quote one of my former colleagues that said, if we go slow, we'll get there faster. And so I think that if we take the time to do this right and let council know what happened, and it was not a rebuke or a refusal, but it just was a situation where we didn't have everything we needed at the time. And then we want to effectively look at everything and consider all their concerns also.
Yep, I agree. Jose, did you want to add? Let me get your mic.
I think I'm feeling the same way. I feel out of fairness to the committee, especially those that are not that are not on the council, that are not deep into the issues. I don't have a strong sense to say, I feel strongly those requests should come back to us and we should vote on them or not. I don't have a sense for that. And I certainly don't have a sense for what we would be voting on today for the issue. I'm certainly generally aware, but haven't studied it to be able to fairly have an opinion and confidently vote one way or the other. And we've got to recognize that we are approving high level numbers for requests, right? And we got to recognize that clearly some of these are going to have political implications, are going to have nuances that we're not going to be aware of when they come to us. You were thinking I can come up with an example. We're approving requests for fleets. What if there's an environmental group that has concerns for the footprint that we're going to create by buying all these cars? And then that gets that gets some wind, and then next month we're saying, well, there's a council member that wants
you guys to consider this thing. And so I feel like it's much more complex. And so what is our charge? Like, to me, like, what really is my charge and what is it that I'm voting for? I need some time to digest, understand, and before I'm ready to vote one way or the other.
So what
Let's say I agree with you.
What I'm hearing is that when there are council amendments to the recommendations by this committee, you would like to hear receive those amendments, hear from the applicable parties. In this case, the original request came from Parks. So I think we have Director Odom come back. We review those amendments. And in this case, that will have to happen at our next meeting. It's not something we can address today. And it could slow the process, but we'll quote Representative Love, who's quoting somebody else, that by going there slow, we'll get there fast. Councilmember Sepulveda.
Thank you. And I think for this case, I think the boat is already way downriver, and this I don't believe it would. I doubt it would be deferred one more meeting or enough time for us to revisit it. But if we could just let the council body know for in the future if there are amendments, what the process was, and that today we didn't take a position on it because we didn't have the information and the people present to speak on it. I think that would be helpful for them to know. So potentially we could try and plan ahead of time, even though it will be hard if we only meet once a month. So the timing will always be
challenging.
Correct.
Yes. Yep. Agreed. Okay. Everybody feel like we're on the same page? Any questions? Wanda? Okay. Representative Love? Oh. You do have a question, Wanda? Let me get your mic. Oh, okay. Hold that issue then. Did you have something, Representative Love?
I did, just a procedure thing. So, Councilor, you're saying that the vote may go ahead and occur before our next meeting? So in that regard...
But if the comment back to the council is this body wants to have that discussion, we are going to rely on the council members to defer.
Okay.
I mean, I can't.
We'll just wait and see, because at a certain point, if the vote happens, then we'll just change the agenda for the next meeting. There's no sense in having people come in.
Correct.
Okay.
We'll know that.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll know that ahead of time. That's a good point. Rhonda McDaniel.
So I just had a question. In the last round of funding, we were able to track from meeting to meeting. We've already begun to. So will we have a similar spreadsheet that kind of aligns with the framework going forward?
Yes, and I actually have that started with all of the resolutions. I think this deferral just threw me a little bit of a curveball, but I'm actually tracking it now by the expenditure category per the U.S. Treasury, the amount, and the resolution. So we'll always be able to track those items. Absolutely. I do have, we've got a few more things. One is something else for this committee that I thought was important. So as you recall, one of the items that was approved recommended by the committee and approved by council was the $1 million emergency response fund. And that had very defined uses, and PPE was one of them. I had a request from the fire department to use some of those funds for encapsulation bags, which is where they put some of their PPE as well as clothing or anything else that could be contaminated. The encapsulation bags are then used to transport that so that it can be properly washed, cleaned, sanitized. The second piece of that request were actually new and additional washers and dryers to assist with keeping things clean and sanitized in the different firehouses. That the bags were $37,000, the washers and dryers were roughly $200,000. So that $237,000 request came to me and said, well, does this fall under PPE? And There isn't anything in my U.S. Treasury guidance is going to tell me that. And when I feel like we get a little bit into that gray area, I think it's best to come back to you as a committee because you made that recommendation for $1 million. I want to read it specifically just for your benefit. And I apologize, take me just 1 second. This really does kind of fall into the PPE, but not quite. And if you all are comfortable, we will approve that for the fire department under the $1 million. And if not, we won't. Why am I having a hard time here? Thank you. Okay. Trying to do things on the spot. Okay, let me just read that exact verbiage on that resolution. And the clarification, thank you. The clarification for the use of funds is for provide testing and vaccinations, emergency COVID shelters for the unhoused population, anything that requires additional sanitization of metro public buildings, require masks in metro public buildings, and provide related signage of COVID policies and directions. So, and the PPE. So what Alex was just saying is if we interpret it to be PPE, then it falls under that resolution and can be charged to that $1 million response fund. If you say, no, it's not PPE, then we just have to address it differently. If you say we want to fund it, that's another resolution because it's not PPE. Yes. Oops, sorry.
I guess we would have to decide if it's PPE or not, but what is the cost, did they say?
$237,000 total.
Is this something that we have to decide on today? Can we hold this until the next meeting and get more information on if it's PPE or not? I mean, it's almost $250,000, so I think we need to go slow. What was that quote, Representative? Yeah, go slow and get there fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and you want to wait? Okay.
Just look up a definition of PPE. It has to do with protecting the person.
Yeah.
And the thought that we would exhaust 25% of this fund to provide new washers and dryers just seems a little inconsistent with the intent at this point. We can revisit as we get additional requests in, but I just agree. Go slow to go fast.
So, and I will say that I think when we revisit this, I would revisit the $1 million emergency response for only those 5 indicated items. Because this is going to come up over and over and over. We had a very large emergency response fund, which we managed by departments asking and saying, yes, that meets COVID. These 2 items meet COVID eligibility. This is exactly what ARP funds are intended for. But because we limited it and put a low dollar amount, we're going to run into this. So I think as we revisit these 2 items, we should revisit the bigger picture. But I guess the last item could be a takeaway. I'm not going to, it's 5:15. You have a draft of of what we would like to seek the community input on the use of these funds. What I did is provided a summary, background information of what is eligible, and then I provided the guiding principles. And I provided the subset of each guiding principle. And with that information, what we're asking the community to do is say, how important do you think all of these items within those guiding principles are. Give us, rank them 1 to 5. 1 is they are the most important, 5 is they are not important. So tell us what you think is important that we already believe to be important, but tell us if you agree, and tell us where your priorities are. And then, of course, it's important to say, what did we miss? What's not in there that you would like to see as a priority for these, for these funds? I think it's that simple. I don't want to oversimplify it, but we also want to make sure that we get back information that we can react to. I hope that we get thousands of responses, but we have to remember if we do get thousands of responses, how can that be quantified back to something this committee can react to? So if there are additional questions you would like to see incorporated, if you would send those to me, we can bring this up on the next agenda again. But I welcome any of you to give me your feedback in the meantime. And I'll also try to have a pretty version. This certainly is just a lot of words, and I think we've all taken enough surveys that you can put some text boxes and some color and formatting that will make this a little bit more palatable to the public when they see it. But the content would still be the same. We'd be asking them to please prioritize the areas we've already identified. Okay, does that suit everybody well? Thank you. I appreciate your time as always. It's robust conversations. I don't know that we'll ever get out of here under 2 hours, but I'll try to keep us there. Thank you for all of your recommendations today and your time. We are officially adjourned.
And you know HVAC? She didn't vote on it, so.
Oh, Councilmember Gamble or Councilmember Sepulveda, would one of you be willing to sponsor the HVAC recommendation? Can you do that? Thank you so much. Oh, yes. I'm sorry, they got a little bit buried. They are there, and I'm happy to lend my pen if you don't mind to sign your name. There. Do you want my pen? Turn off all these.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.